Good friend Scott Braddock, editor, Quorum Report. Scott, we have nothing to talk about today.
Chad, it's a slow news day.
That's right. It always is.
Just nothing going on. I do want to say at the outset here, thoughts and prayers. I really don't appreciate when some will act like it's just trite to offer your thoughts and prayers. You should do that. That doesn't mean you can't do other things too.
Right.
Thoughts and prayers for the people in El Paso. And I said this on a couple of other shows this morning. If people go to my Twitter page, Scott Braddock, on Twitter at Scott Braddock. The top tweet there, the pinned tweet, has the link to a charity, a fund in El Paso. People want to donate, they can do that. And, after there are tragedies like this, you always have a question about who can you trust to make sure that the money will get where it's supposed to go. And so did vet this with the El Paso delegation to the Texas legislature. They said this is a respected, well-established fund. You can click the link there at Scott Braddock on Twitter, and I've got that fund there for you. I hope people will join me in donating.
Very good. Scott, I guess we'll start off with the shooting and some of the responses. There were really two responses that stuck out to me, and I want to see if they're the same ones that stuck out to you. The response from Texas Land Commissioner George P. Bush stuck out to me when he called out I think the first time he called it white terrorism, then he has a piece out, I think, in the Atlantic today talking about white nationalism terrorism. So, and then also on top of that, Senator Ted Cruz had basically the same reaction as well.
Yeah, both of them saying that white nationalism has no place. Essentially, that's what they're saying in our society, and it needs to be called out just like any other terrorism. Commissioner Bush mentioned and invoked his service in Afghanistan, saying, look, he signed up to fight terrorism, and it really doesn't matter what type of terrorism. Terrorism is terrorism, and you have to fight it and take it on. And basically had Senator Cruz saying much the same thing. Here was the quote from Bush. I proudly served in Afghanistan as a naval officer where our mission was to fight and kill terrorists. I believe fighting terrorism remains a national priority, and that should include standing firm against white terrorism here in the United States. I saw that our friend over at Breitbart, Brandon Darby, said pretty much the same thing. He said, call it what it is. It's white nationalist terrorism.
Yeah. And I think that term, it seems like it's starting to pick up a little bit, even among Republicans. Correct?
Yeah, interesting that you do have Republicans saying this up and down the spectrum, really. And you actually had the President of the United States this morning speak out against extremism in, I'm sure you heard, in the White House, made a quick speech talking about the need to crack down on radicalism. And earlier in the day on Twitter, you had the President talking about all of this. And part of the President's comments has been, a policy prescription as well to get Republicans and Democrats to work together to enact some reforms. And, the intersection of mental health and access to firearms is obviously right in the center of the conversation with the President talking about a red flag law, this, of course, being something where those who are adjudicated to be a danger to themselves and others would be denied access to a gun. That was something that was considered. You remember after the shooting in Santa Fe here in Texas, Governor Abbott had said that it was something he would be interested in looking at, and you did have the Texas House leadership open to that, but Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick put the kibosh on that right out of the gate, and then Abbott backed off and said, no, that was just something I was considering. It wasn't my policy prescription.
It did seem like the governor at the time was, I don't know if he was all in. We've had this discussion before about, when the governor is all in on something versus not really all in. But it seemed as though he at least was open, very open to red flag laws. How do you, on the national level, when the president comes out and says that now he's open to red flag laws, now, is that going to be a major push by the president, or is he giving lip service? We don't know. But does that change the calculation even with Texas politics?
Yeah, it depends on what exactly he tries to get done and how much political capital he wants to spend on that. Of course, when it comes to the legislative process, they don't do anything unless they do it together. That's the way the former Speaker, Joe Strauss, always talked about it. The House and Senate have to agree. If they don't, then whatever that thing is that you're trying to do, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
They have to kind of hold hands as they go through the process, and the lieutenant governor was completely against that. So in Washington, you have divided government, right? It sounds like the Democrats in the House would probably be quicker to embrace something like that than the Republican leadership in the Senate, but we'll see.
Yeah, okay. Speaking of congressional leadership and just congressional races, there's been a story developing here in this state over the last couple of weeks now with congressional Republican retirement. Scott, talk about that.
Well, the fourth of the GOP retirements from in Congress from Texas announced just this morning. It was first reported last night, and the official announcement came from Kenny Marchant, who's from Dallas-Fort Worth. Said he's been proud to serve folks in Congress, but it's time to move on. You have Pete Olson down in the Houston area, Will Hurd down along the border, and one other. And so you have these folks, and Mike Conaway up in your area. So you have these congressmen who are opting to leave, and I think that they have probably different reasons, all of them do. Look at the fact that Will Hurd and Pete Olson and Marchant had close races last year in 2018. Of course, Hurd is from a traditionally swingy district, if you will. For a while, that district went from Democrat to Republican to Democrat to Republican, and then Hurd, as a very skilled politician, was able to keep that in Republican hands for consecutive terms. It was actually quite a feat because it just is one of those districts that's in question in November. But some of these other districts, you go back 3-4 years ago, Chad, they were not competitive at all. The Marchant seat and the Pete Olson seat down in Houston, those were not competitive 4 years ago. Those were rock-solid Republican districts. But in 2018, those guys won by the skin of their teeth, and I think they see the two things. One, they may see the writing on the wall as far as what's going to happen in 2020 when you have increased voter turnout. Remember, in 2018, we had, 8.4 million people vote in Texas, which was presidential levels. So what does that mean for the turnout in an actual presidential year next year? It may mean voting at 10 million strength, something like that, maybe 12 million. We just don't know. And what that means for down-ballot races, that's a big open question, especially with the elimination of one-punch straight-ticket voting, and what the backlash to President Trump really is going to look like in 2020, or if he's going to be able to shore things up and do well in Texas. We just don't know. But I think there's a couple things. It's that these are going to be tough races and expensive races, and then the other thing is that Republicans are now in the minority. And in Washington, and this wasn't true even 10 years ago, but now in Washington, if you're in the minority, you don't get to do almost anything other than maybe go on Fox News or MSNBC, depending on whether you're Republican or Democrat. When you're in the minority, it used to be, more than a decade ago, that you could still work with the majority. If you're a Republican in the minority, you could work with majority Democrats or vice versa to try to pass some pretty major legislation. But after 2010, when the Republicans came in and the Obama backlash after 2008 and 9, after they passed the Affordable Care Act, which, of course, there was huge, I'm understating it to say huge backlash at that time to all of that, Republicans came in and they didn't let the minority do much of anything. And, of course, when the Democrats got into the majority, they have returned the favor. And so, Martin Frost, former Democrat from the Dallas area, a Democratic congressman, he used to joke that, whenever the Republicans are in the majority, they put the boot on your neck and they don't ever say, hey, you got enough air down there? You doing okay? No. It's the same thing for a lot of these Republicans. The Democrats are, in all likelihood, still going to be in the majority in the House. And why would you go through an expensive, nasty race only to go back and not be able to do anything? A lot of these folks are thinking it's time to call it quits.
Well, and Scott, one thing that I keep seeing from some of the national think pieces out on this is that it doesn't make it impossible for Republicans to take back the House, but the more Republican House members that retire, the harder it becomes, because now you have other races to focus on. Being an incumbent, you have a leg up already, but being the new person, you don't have that leg up.
when you have a wide open race, it is definitely more of a scramble, if you will. The playing field is a little more evened out for the Republicans and Democrats in the fall when you do have these districts where there has been explosive growth in the suburbs around Dallas-Fort Worth and Houston especially, also down here in the Austin area. John Carter, another congressman who won by the skin of his teeth last time when M.J. Hager was challenging him. She's one of the candidates, one of the Democrats who's lined up to try to take on Senator John Cornyn next year. And look, it may be, let's take the case of Hurd, for example. Hurd, because of the way he's had to speak out against President Trump, has not just done a lot of work to try to shore up some Democratic support in his district, but that also, won't surprise you, it angers those who are further to the right and are folks who support President Trump. So I had heard a lot of chatter about the idea that Will Hurd might have faced a pretty stiff primary challenge, which would mean that he'd, have to win his primary, maybe by moving a little bit more to the right, and even if he's able to pull that off, then moving to the right might, put him in bad position for winning in the fall, or someone who is a different kind of Republican would win that primary and then go on to take on the Democrat in the fall, and then that Republican would lose. So in these districts that are getting closer, it's more of a coin flip as far as what's going to happen in primaries and in November.
Visiting with Scott Braddock, editor, Quorum Report. Before we let you go, there was a story last week. I don't know if people remember this one. What's the latest on the whole audio tape, the secret audio tape, Scott? Anything new there?
I am trying to figure that out. Last week, when Michael Quinn Sullivan, the spokesman over at Empower Texans, claimed that he had an audio recording of his meeting with Speaker Dennis Bonnen, which, if folks are just catching up with this, just to reset, Bonnen, of course, had badmouthed Empower Texans for months and said that he was not going to try to appease those folks, right? He had said he sure as hell wasn't going to waste his time. That's the way he put it. Well, he had a meeting with them anyway, and I've been talking with Republicans, over the course of the last couple of weeks as this story has unfolded, and Republicans seem to be in the Texas House sort of divided about whether this is going to blow over, but they don't seem divided at all. There's unity on the idea that it was just a sort of a disaster for there to be a meeting between Bonnen and Michael Quinn Sullivan. Well, Sullivan says he has a tape of the meeting. He says that there were some really disparaging comments made about Texas House members on that recording. Bonnen has said that the group, Empower Texans, ought to just release the tape, if they have one, of his conversation. The accusation of a potential felony is included in all of this because Sullivan says that Bonnen offered media credentials to Empower Texas to their scorecard newsletter in exchange for the way they would spend their PAC dollars by politically targeting some Texas House Republicans, 10 of them on a supposed hit list. Bonnen says that he did not provide them any such list, and of course from your area, GOP caucus chairman Dustin Burrows was the other guy in the room, and Bonnen said that he had Burrows there to be his witness, but Bonnen also said that he didn't want Burrows to make any comments, and I was going to check in with you. Have y'all heard from Burrows in the last week, or is he still MIA up there?
Not yet.
Interesting. So we'll see. The group Empower Texans has a long history of attacking Republican office holders, and that's why Republicans are, again, pretty shocked that Bonnen had this meeting with them at all. And while Empower Texans is arguing in federal court that they should have media credentials for the Texas House, in fact, they're going to the Fifth Circuit in New Orleans to argue that, while they're arguing that they are media, in my estimation, they are not acting the way media would act in this instance, because a media organization, a news operation like the KFYO newsroom or the Quorum Report or the Lubbock Avalanche Journal, whatever, if they had the results of an undercover investigation, they would publish that and let the audience decide. But what Empower Texans is doing is just saying that, well, Republican office holders can come to our office and listen to the tape.
Scott, what are you hearing? Because there have been, from what I have been able to hear, about 5 lawmakers, Republican lawmakers. I think 4 out of those 5 have all been friendly towards Empower Texans, have supposedly heard this audio. Has anybody else, any of the so-called unfriendlies or non-allies of Empower Texans, have they been able to hear any of this audio? And do Republicans who are elected officials down in Austin, do they want this audio released, or do they just kind of want this to go away?
I think that there are those who want the air cleared. I did hear over the weekend that there were some Republican Texas House members who were calling other members and saying, "Don't worry about this. It's going to blow over. Let's just move on with our business." So there is that school of thought. Then there are the others who want it to just come out publicly. There are only 4 that we know of so far who have gone down to the Empower Texans attorney's office and listened to this tape. 3 of those have had their campaigns almost completely bankrolled by Empower Texans. One of them, Travis Clardy from Nacogdoches, who's originally from Lubbock, by the way, he has said that the audio does back up Sullivan's claims, although in an interview he did have to be pressed about about whether it did back up those claims, so that's worth noting. But I wonder, Chad, if you're a Republican member of the Texas House, part of your calculation has to be, do I really want to go down there and be one of the guys who checked to see if the speaker was lying? Because let's say Bonnen is still speaker in the next legislative session. This is a speaker with a long memory. And then the other thing is, if there was, an allegation or there is an allegation here of a potential felony, if there is evidence of a felony, I would imagine that their legal counsel would probably tell them, maybe you don't want to listen to a tape that makes you witness to a crime.
Well.
Lot going on with that.
Yes, there is. Oh, by the way, before I let you go,
the easy way for them to clear it up would just be release the tape.
Yeah, I'm with you. Now, let me ask you this, Scott, before we let you go. Have you requested yet to hear the audio tape?
I have. The attorney for Empower Texans is a guy named Tony McDonald. I called and sent a text message for him to call me. Have not heard back.
Okay, all right.
But they did say if somebody was, impacted by it, and there's an allegation that I was mentioned in the tape, they said to reach out. So that's what I'm doing.
Yeah. All right, Scott. Tell folks what they can find at Quorum Report.
We are covering all this for you, the political ramifications of this, plus those congressional retirements. You can sign up for our free email alerts at quorumreport.com.
All right, Scott. As always, appreciate your time. We'll visit with you next week.
Thanks, my friend.
If not before. We'll see what happens.
Yes, I'm here for breaking news. Believe
Absolutely. Me. That's Scott Braddock, editor, quorumreport.com.